An ordinary grocery trip turned into an unforgettable moment when an elderly woman told a young black man to go back to Africa. What he said next didn't just silence the store, it changed everything. The grocery store buzzed with the usual rhythm of a weekday afternoon. Carts squeaked across tiled floors, shelves rustled as hands reached for cereal boxes, and soft murmurs filled the air like background music. It was a sunny day in a quiet Ohio neighborhood, the kind of place where faces were familiar and routines rarely changed. But today, something would change. Near the produce section, an elderly woman in her late 70s adjusted her glasses. She wore a faded cardigan, her silver hair pinned back with quiet precision. She looked like someone's sweet grandmother until she opened her mouth. She stood muttering, visibly annoyed, reaching for a bag of apples when a young black man approached the nearby stand. He was tall, casually dressed in a blue hoodie and jeans, holding a basket in one hand and texting with the other. His name was Daryl. He moved with quiet confidence, just another shopper running errands. As he reached for a bag of oranges, the woman turned sharply. Her eyes narrowed, her face twisted. Then, loudly and without warning, she spat, "Why don't you go back to Africa?" The words hung in the air. The aisle fell silent, carts paused, conversations froze. Daryl stopped texting. He looked at her. Not with anger, not even with shock, but with something deeper, disappointment. He took a breath, then he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I was born in Ohio. My grandfather fought in World War II, my mother's a nurse who saved more lives than you'll ever know, and I'm just here buying oranges. Same as you." There was a beat of silence. Then someone further down the aisle started clapping. Another followed, and then another. The woman looked around, suddenly small, suddenly out of place. Daryl didn't say another word. He simply picked up his oranges, turned, and walked away. And just like that, an ordinary grocery trip became a reminder of dignity, of truth, and of how one voice can change everything. It wasn't subtle. Her eyes narrowed and her lips pressed into a tight, unforgiving line. "You people don't belong here," she said, loudly enough for others nearby to hear. Daryl froze. His fingers hovered above his phone. When he looked up, she went on, her voice sharp and slicing through the air like broken glass. "Why don't you go back to Africa, where you came from?" The atmosphere shifted. It was as if the air itself thickened. A couple of shoppers stopped mid-step, some exchanged nervous glances, others lowered their eyes, pretending not to hear. The rhythm of the store came to a sudden stop, replaced by a silence that stretched too far, too heavy to ignore. Daryl's first reaction was disbelief. His brow creased. For a moment, it seemed like he might speak right away. But he didn't.
Instead, he inhaled. Slow, deep, steady. His face was unreadable, as if he were quietly sorting through every possible response, measuring the weight of his words before releasing them. The woman, still clutching her apples, didn't move. She stood firm, unrepentant. The tension around her crackled, palpable and raw. A young mother nearby gently pulled her child in the opposite direction. An older man near the potatoes watched anxiously, waiting to see what Daryl would do. The silence grew heavier than any insult. It was a silence that demanded something, a word, a reaction, a reckoning. Daryl stood motionless, his hand wrapped tightly around the handle of his grocery basket. In that moment, the world seemed to contract around him. The fluorescent lights dimmed in intensity. The distant hum of refrigerators faded. Every sound muted, every eye turned toward him. And that's when everything began to change. The weight of the woman's words lingered like a foul odor no one could ignore. She didn't waver. Her stance was firm, almost proud, as if she expected her insult to go unchallenged. With a sharp tug, she adjusted her cardigan, lifting her chin in a silent dare. Say something. A young employee stacking bananas just feet away froze, unsure whether to intervene or disappear. At the checkout lanes, a cashier craned her neck for a better view. The nearby shoppers didn't step forward, but they didn't walk away either. They were part of it now, witnesses caught in a moment bigger than themselves. Daryl looked at the woman. His face remained calm, but behind his eyes, thoughts moved fast. 1,000 responses surged through his mind. He could raise his voice. He could shame her. He could turn his back and leave. But none of that felt right. The The tension pressed down on him, thick and suffocating. But instead of folding under its weight, he exhaled slowly. He shifted his basket to his other hand. Then he stood taller, his quiet strength beginning to fill the space. When he spoke, his voice was steady, measured, clear, and every word sliced through the silence. "Ma'am," he began. His tone was measured. "Do you even realize what you just said?" It wasn't an accusation. It was a question laced with reflection, as if he was offering her a chance to hear herself, to think. But she wasn't interested in thinking. "I said what I said," she snapped, her voice rising. "This is my country. People like you don't belong here." That was the line. A sharp gasp came from a woman near the bread aisle. The murmur of the crowd grew louder, a ripple of discomfort spreading outward. But Daryl didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move an inch closer. Instead, he let the silence stretch. He let her words echo. He let everyone feel them. Then, with a quiet nod, he said, "All right." His calmness was disarming, unsettling in its steadiness. "Let's talk about that," he continued, his voice low, deliberate. "Since you brought it up." The room seemed to hold its breath. The storm was coming, but it wasn't loud, it wasn't violent. It was something deeper, something undeniable. Daryl shifted his weight. He set his basket gently on the floor, his movements full of purpose. The calm around him felt like gravity, drawing in even those who had tried to pretend they weren't watching. He looked at the woman, not with rage, but with a quiet resolve that made her shoulders stiffen. "You said I don't belong here," he said evenly. "But let me tell you something about where I come from." His voice held weight, each word chosen like a stone carefully laid. "My great-great-grandfather was born in Mississippi," he began, pausing just long enough for the words to land. "He was a sharecropper, working land he didn't own, breaking his back so his children might live a life just a little less heavy than his own." "My father?" Daryl said, his voice firmer now. "He was a slave, kidnapped, beaten, sold like property, and for what? To help build the very country you're standing in." The woman's lips tightened, but this time she stayed silent. The crowd, however, was fully engaged. A man by the dairy section who had been half scrolling through his phone let it drop to his side. An older couple near the cereal aisle whispered to each other, but didn't look away. Daryl continued. "My grandfather fought in World War II, he said, his voice rising with purpose. Fought for a country that sent him overseas to risk his life, only to be treated like dirt when he came back. He couldn't sit at the same lunch counters, he couldn't drink from the same water fountains, but he stayed. You know why?" He paused. The silence was thick, hushed, and reverent. "Because he believed in this country's promise, even when it didn't believe in him." Even the constant hum of refrigerators seemed quiet. Every soul in that store felt the weight of history pressed into the present. "And my parents," Daryl continued, his tone softening but no less powerful. "They fought too, not with weapons but with their lives. Every day, my mother's a teacher. She spent her whole life lifting up kids, no matter their skin color. And my father, he's a mechanic, the kind of man who'd pull over to help someone like you if your car broke down." He let the words land. No rush, no theatrics, just truth. Then he looked the woman dead in the eyes, steady, unflinching. "So you're telling me," he said slowly, "that I don't belong here, that I should go back to Africa?" Daryl shook his head slightly, his voice now touched with a quiet sadness. "Ma'am," he said gently, "I am just as much a part of this country as you are, maybe even more, because my family paid for it, in blood, sweat, and tears." The elderly woman's face flushed. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her bag of apples. She opened her mouth, as if to speak, but the words caught in her throat and never came. Darrell took a step back, his composure solid, unwavering. "I could have walked away," he said, his voice now addressing everyone around him, not just her. "But what good would that do? Ignorance doesn't get better in silence. It's up to all of us to be better than this, to be better than words like those." His words hung in the air, weighty, undeniable. But the story wasn't done, not yet, because now it was the crowd's turn to speak. The silence that followed was deeper than before, a stillness that carried the weight of 1,000 untold stories. No one moved, no one spoke. Even the store seemed to hold its breath. The elderly woman's face was a canvas of emotion, flushed with anger, laced with embarrassment, and something more fragile beneath the surface. Shane. She looked around, as if searching the crowd for support, but none came. Then, quietly, firmly, a man in a baseball cap stepped forward. His voice broke the silence. "He's right," the man said, his tone low but steady. "We've got to be better than this." It was like a spell breaking. Near the frozen foods, an older woman nodded slowly. "My dad fought in that same war," she said, her voice trembling, "and he always told me the only color that ever mattered was the red on the flag." The murmurs began to grow, gentle at first, like a rising tide. From the front of the store, a young cashier, barely 20, called out from her station. "I've never seen anyone handle something like that with so much grace. Thank you." The elderly woman, now visibly shaken, tightened her grip on her cart. She didn't offer an apology, but the fire in her eyes had faded, replaced by something quieter, uncertain. When she finally spoke, her voice barely rose above a whisper. "I didn't mean." She trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish. Darrell turned to her, his expression softer now, not with sympathy, but with a kind of understanding born from experience. "It's not about what you meant," he said gently. "It's about how it came across. Words matter. Actions matter even more." From the deli counter, a man began to clap, slowly at first, as if unsure if it was the right moment. But then another joined in, and another, until the store filled with applause, not loud or rowdy, but full of something deeper, respect. People clapped, not just for Darrell's words, but for the courage it took to face hate with dignity, restraint, and truth. The elderly woman looked around one last time, her face pale, her confidence stripped away. Then, without a word, she wheeled her cart toward the exit, quietly disappearing into the afternoon light. As she left, a few shoppers approached Darrell. One woman placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "Thank you," she said, "for saying what needed to be said." Darrell offered a faint smile, lifting his basket back into his hand. "Sometimes," he said, almost to himself, "it's not about winning or losing. It's about making sure people hear the truth." The crowd slowly began to disperse. The tension that had once gripped the store melted into something quieter, reflection, perhaps. Some people looked inspired, others simply thoughtful, but no one walked away untouched. But everyone seemed changed, in some small, quiet way. The moment had passed, but the impact of Darrell's words lingered, etched into the air like a truth too long ignored. As the crowd returned to their routines, the grocery store felt different, quieter, more aware. The usual hum had softened, as if even the store itself was reflecting. Darrell continued his shopping, his steps measured, his expression thoughtful. He wasn't shaken, but he was carrying something deeper now, the weight of what had been said and the echoes it would leave behind. At the checkout line, the young cashier who had spoken up earlier scanned his items with a shy smile. "What you said back there?" She hesitated, then found the courage. "It meant a lot. People don't always stand up like that, especially not with that much grace." Darrell smiled softly, his voice warm. "Sometimes grace is the only way to break through," he said. "Anger just builds walls." Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the parking lot, bathed in amber light. As Darrell walked to his car, he noticed the elderly woman sitting silently in hers, hands gripping the steering wheel. She stared straight ahead, her face unreadable. For a moment, he considered walking over, one final word, a gesture of closure. But he didn't. Some lessons take time to settle, and he had already said everything that needed to be said. Darrell sat at the kitchen table with his father, the warmth of a quiet evening settling around them. He recounted the events of the day, every word, every silence, every stare. His father, a man of few words and deep wisdom, listened without interruption, his weathered hands folded neatly in front of him. When Darrell finished, the room was still. Then his father spoke, his voice low but firm. "You did the right thing, son," he said. "Not just for yourself, but for everyone who was watching. People like her, they don't change overnight, but you planted a seed. That's all you can do sometimes, plant the seed and let it grow." Darrell nodded, his father's words sinking in, settling beside the weight of the day. He realized then that the encounter, though painful, had been necessary. because ignorance doesn't change unless it's confronted, and silence only allows it to grow roots. Across town, the elderly woman sat alone at her dining table, a plate of food untouched before her. She stared out the window, but her mind wasn't on the view. Darrell's words echoed, soft but persistent, cutting through the rigid layers of belief she had long mistaken for truth. She thought of her own grandchildren, the world they were inheriting, and for the first time in years, she felt a flicker of something unfamiliar. Doubt. In the days that followed, the story of what happened at the grocery store made its way through the neighborhood. People talked not just about what had been said, but about how it had been said. Darrell's calm, his courage, the dignity with which he met hate, it stayed with them. What started as an ugly moment became something more. A conversation, a reflection, a quiet reckoning. It became a reminder that words carry weight, that silence can be broken with grace, and that sometimes standing up for what's right starts with just one voice in the middle of a grocery store aisle. Darrell never sought recognition for what he did. He wasn't trying to be a hero, but his quiet strength rippled through the community in ways he never could have imagined. Strangers began approaching him, some with gratitude, others with stories of their own, moments of prejudice, pain, and resilience they had carried in silence for far too long. His calm stand had sparked something deeper, conversations that had long been avoided, truths that needed to be faced. Even the elderly woman began to change, not all at once, but slowly, uncertainly. She started to question the beliefs she had clung to for so long. She didn't know if she'd ever cross paths with Darrell again, but if she did, she hoped she'd have the courage to offer him the apology he deserved. Moments like this remind us, kindness has power. Truth, spoken with grace, can shift the world. Standing up doesn't always mean raising your voice. Sometimes it means speaking calmly, with conviction, and letting the truth do the rest. To everyone listening, let this be a reminder. Your words and actions matter. They can hurt, or they can heal. They can divide, or they can unite. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Together, we can spread messages of hope, courage, and understanding, and take one step closer to the world we all deserve.